Yeah, Westmead's an interesting precinct. I can see over there we've got Daryl Harkness and Lance from Liverpool who are here and they want to collaborate with Westmead, which is fantastic. We've got to have precincts collaborating with each other. But Westmead is a bit unique in that, unlike Liverpool and some of the other precincts, there's a huge land asset. I mean, the size and scale, Malcolm Smith and I, we had a great wander through the precinct yesterday. Westmead is just immense. It is huge. And in that hugeness comes a surplus of land that will never probably be needed for public health reasons. There's already a huge investment in public health. It's becoming more vertical, it's becoming more dense, and there's this leftover remainder. And that's the big question mark in my mind. What is to become of this? I mean, the great thing is that 5 years ago, there were lots of conversations about this surplus land that government owned and what was to become of it. And I think there was a view by some people that, well, it should just be flogged off for the highest and best use for housing. There may be some good quality housing that's required in there, but that's no longer the dominant view. The dominant view, I think, is we've got to be strategic about the use of this land. But I guess that's got to be governed as well. How does this place get developed for all those other things? What's the development entity? So in my mind, they're things that we still haven't fully answered, and maybe the next panel could answer it. I wanted to acknowledge Jason Wrigley and EY. EY's a strong partner with us. EY's got a big Western Sydney footprint. They have re-established themselves in Parramatta and are getting involved in all sorts of things. And Jason's been a great partner in a whole lot of things we've done in the last 6 or 12 months. And also to acknowledge Isaac Bromley, who is a partner in strategy and transactions. And I might actually ask Isaac if he can come and introduce our panel. We did have Graham Loy, the CEO of the Health District, coming both last night and today. He's had a bit of a health issue he's got to deal with. He's really apologetic. He really, really wanted to be here. We can brief him on the outcomes later on and tell him how it's going to be governed. Isaac.
Thanks, David. I think David and Jeff have set the scene well for this next panel, so I won't go into it too much, but what we're hoping to do is delve into really how we get this thing done and translate that vision that Jeff's described and all the great investment that's already happened and really push it forward and accelerate it now. So without any delay, I'll introduce the panel, starting with Amy Brown. Amy is the new CEO of Investment New South Wales, and hopefully is going to share some insight on how that comes together and feeds into the delivery of the precinct. We've got Cathryn Cox, CEO of Sydney Children's Hospitals Network, and Cathryn's going to give us a health lens as clearly the core tenant in the precinct. And then we've got Michael Flatley. I don't know where Michael's sitting. There you are, Michael. Michael's CEO of Westmead Private Hospital, and is going to give us insights into working on the precinct already and how government and private sector might come together to drive some of these outcomes. So, might shift to the... Okay, can everybody hear me okay? That's going okay. Great. So in preparing the panel, we sort of thought we'd try and address 3 key issues, and the 3 key issues we discussed were what's going to be the key drivers for this in terms of the role of government and the role of stakeholders coming together, and how is that going to be driven? The second one was how do we enact some of those place-making concepts that both David and Jeff described, particularly around amenity, bringing the stakeholders together and the people in this room. And then the third one, which I think is probably the most important, is if you're a stakeholder sitting here today, want to be part of the precinct, already part of the precinct, how do you continue to be involved, and what are the priorities going to be over the next 12 to 18 months, and probably even faster than that using Jeff's 100 days. How do you get involved and who do you reach out to? So I might start with Amy. That's probably a really good place with Investment New South Wales being launched on Monday, getting a bit of an overview of that agency and how it's going to play a part.
Sure thing. Hi everyone, good to see you. So Investment New South Wales was stood up on Monday, and it's brought together a bunch of stuff that was happening around government with a very strong kind of mandate and objective, and Jeff's touched on some of this, to make the most of this moment in time where New South Wales is seen globally, and is started to be seen globally, as a safe and attractive place to do business, more than the Harbour Bridge fireworks on New Year's Eve. And acting as kind of that one, the one-stop shop for potential investors, and by investors I define that very broadly, which I'll get to, and working out and working very deliberately and strategically with those investors, both domestic and global, on the many ways that you can partner with New South Wales Government, concierging that through so that we can maximise the economic benefit, the jobs growth, and the fantastic, well-connected places and hubs of innovation and economic benefit, and place and government services and all of those great things that come when you do this well.
Great. And Amy, how do you see the coming together of Jeff and GSC, Elizabeth Milewater, yourself, Health as the sort of core agencies for the delivery phase as we move away from the vision into the next 30 years?
Yep. So for me, in terms of what is government's objective for Westmead, the way I'm thinking of it at this moment in time and for the next phase going forward is that it's all about evolution of the precinct through the collaboration of its investors. I don't tend to use the word stakeholders. To me, stakeholders sometimes can imply a kind of arm's length interest in the place. I consider everyone investors in the place, that much stronger word of kind of almost that, kind of heart and soul and emotion even into it. And by investors, I'm meaning, government organisations, university and education institutions, non-NGOs, the community itself, almost that we talk about a triple helix of district leadership, which is great. I think I'm up to a quintuple helix of district leadership because it takes all of those working together. And within that, I absolutely encompass the landowners and strategic partners such as Darubbin Land Council. And it was great to have Kevin up here earlier to touch on that. So if we're going to talk about the collaboration of investors, then to me, Investment New South Wales is that bit. So it's the Greater Sydney Commission are curating the place and realising the vision of Westmead, and a lot of that is coordinating in a very practical sense the various parts of government that have an interest in the place. I mean, if we can count on kind of two hands the parts of government that are working on this. Obviously, it's health, it's transport through their provision, of metro and light rail. Treasury are going to give us the money, thanks in advance. Planning, industry or environment are involved in the kind of property elements and the planning. Greater Sydney Commission, us. So there's so many parts of government, and so a lot of that needs to be coordinated behind the scenes. It's making sure for Greater Sydney Commission that we have these investors that I'm referring to all contributing to the advice and the governance itself. And again, that's your R&D partners, your private investors. I'm even thinking right down to kind of venture capitalists for health tech, for example. And I actually used the word Internet of Things in a sentence the other day. So clearly I'm, taking to my new role. But for me, Investment New South Wales is then about using that place to then attract more investment, both domestically and globally. And by me attracting the investment, we have some great anchor tenants and anchor institutions for the precinct, and by Jeff creating a great precinct through the Greater Sydney Commission, then I'm attracting more investment and anchors. So it is a bit of a virtuous circle.
Great. So on that note, then we might ask Michael for his views from the industry side. And Michael, just some thinking around what Amy's just described and where you see yourself playing a role and what you think some of the challenges are for participants like yourself in being part of all of this vision.
Okay, thank you. I think it's well worth starting with the basics. We're in a great position at Westmead. We've got some tremendous institutions there. I'm here speaking as one of the few non-governmental. And I think part of, if we've been guilty of anything in the past, is patting ourselves on the back and saying we're a great precinct without having a vision of what is our next step. And I think the next step for us is, if there's anything missing within the environment at the moment, it's the investors and the entrepreneurs. And I think part of the reason why they're missing is we haven't made it easy to do business with. And in other industries, what you tend to look at, you ask yourself the question, are we easy to do business with? Do people know how to get hold of us and know how to curate the journey? And I think within Westmead, that has been the missing link. And I think the timing is absolutely superb for Amy's new department to be involved, because that is actually what we need to do. And it was great to hear Jeff talking about we're not competing with Melbourne, we're competing internationally. I occasionally Google health precincts in Australia. Westmead isn't on there. Now, the likelihood of an investor Googling where do I want to invest is low, but it's just a sense of we've got to be cautious of not talking ourselves up when actually our competitors, and I think that's how we've got to look at it, our competitors are actually doing stuff. So I think the timing is great, and part of it is we do have to make it easier to invest in the precinct. And if Amy forgives me, but we talked about this last week, as somebody who sits on the precinct, we have big expansion plans, we need more land, I don't know how to get it. Now, if somebody who is on the precinct cannot access land but wants to invest money, that's the problem. And picking on David's introduction in his welcome, he correctly called out billions of dollars of government money have been invested. At some stage, the money tree will run short, and therefore private money is needed. And therefore we've got to make it easier for private investments to come onto the precinct and actually invest against a plan and a vision. And I'll be fascinated by Jeff's 100-day plan. Industries always tend to get a little bit suspicious of 100 days plan because things tend to move so quickly that by day 30 they're out of date. So that will be fascinating to look at. But I think it is that sense of now is the call to action. If we don't move to action now, we're missing a phenomenal opportunity. And it's only so long that we can actually say how good we are when other precincts internationally are moving forward. So I think that's my sense of, from a non-government entity on the precinct, the timing is great, make it easier for us to invest, help us to understand what the pathway is to invest money on the precinct.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I think that's really important. And where does the private sector go to? Who do they speak to? How do we unlock some of the middle part of the campus that we were talking about? And it's probably a good segue for asking Cathryn a question. And Cathryn, I'm going to change the question, I notice, a little bit. But if you could just share with us some of your priorities, but probably with the lens of Jeff's point around non-health, and I know you're already thinking about some of the research and the investment around things that stretch outside sort of typical health delivery. Yeah.
I think we'd be having a very different conversation if we had this last week, because I think we've kind of got the missing link now with Investment New South Wales and that absolutely putting it in place. Because I know that Graham and I, certainly, and I'll speak for him given he's indisposed, have been doing, I think, that soft governance. So we're really working closely together. We want to have a common voice. We don't want you to be saying, here's the network, here's the LHD on that precinct, and so there's almost internal competition. So we've been doing a lot to be very clear about articulating where we want to excel. I think we're working really closely with Rimmer and Phil and CMRI, with Roger as other really key partners on the precinct. And I think for the first time we're starting to articulate very clearly about what we're going to excel in. And so we can communicate that to our investors, and that's around cell and gene therapy, our viral vector manufacturing, it's around, phage therapy, it's around that real precision medicine discovery end of the business. We can partner with Michael and we can articulate to people, and that that's a common purpose and objective of the precinct, and that's what we're going to grow. And that's a bit of that soft governance, I think, where people have come together and we have those conversations regularly. So then the other thing, though, I would sort of say is that certainly we can attract investment in. We've actually got some world leaders here, and I don't think we should be modest about that. And we should be really able to promote that, and because we're already attracting people in, and that's when then the place comes, because we need to have amenity if we want these high-end students, researchers, employees to come. It has to be a great place to live and to bring up your children and to know those children will have jobs. So then that gets into, I think, accommodation partners. It gets into how do we even reimagine our health facilities. There's another $619 million coming into the children's next stage. But how do we completely reimagine how that sits in a place? How do we make that attractive so it's not just that health institution? So then you bring different partners into those retail and commercial spaces even. So I just think the whole concierge approach to how we look for proper med tech people, how we look for big data, how we look for those sorts of partners, I just think it's really exciting. We're ready to go.
Great.
Can I just make one comment on something Cathryn said, which struck a chord? Cathryn, you're sort of talking a bit in terms of globally, how do we promote ourselves as well? And, you know, again, Sydney, not just as nice beaches and a harbour bridge, but talented, innovative people, really high quality levels of R&D in our universities, you know, great startups and scale-ups and entrepreneurs and all this good stuff. Some of the channels that I've now inherited as a result of this change in government are things like Destination New South Wales. So they have a huge impact globally in terms of our brand. And so one of the things, and they're already on this journey, which is very encouraging, but it's promoting us to attract, you know, not just visitors are good, but far beyond that, you know, talent and business and the brightest minds and the brightest kind of, you know, investment in what you're alluding to, Cathryn, to locate here and stay here and expand their footprint. So, yeah, it's just exciting the kind of tools that we now have in our toolkit to do that.
Great, fantastic. I might come back to you, Michael. Just thinking about you thinking about growth and the opportunity to grow. How do you see yourself growing and working in the precinct with other stakeholders? And then I'll follow that question up to Cathryn and Amy on how we might get to think about some of the practicalities of delivery. So we've got a concierge potentially now, but what does that mean? Who do I pick up the call to, pick up the phone to and say, I've got this great idea for the precinct. It fits into Jeff's plan, it fits into the state's plan. Where do I go next? So maybe we'll start with you, Michael, on how you could work together.
Okay, it's probably worth starting with how do we fit into the precinct. Jeff made a good point that in the 70s, 90% of the orthopods lived in Randwick. If we look at where they live now, over 40% of our surgeons who come to us don't live in the immediate area. So the percentage has come down, but many travel. And the way that of making the precinct uber attractive is to ensure that the top doctors have got options of public work, private work. Nearly 50% of Australians have got private healthcare. If academia is their thing, we've got great universities, and if research is what they're interested in, we've got great research institutes. So the combination of the different elements on the precinct make Westmead the most attractive precinct possible, and I think it is that aggregation of the different partners. I think there's a mixture of, in various things we will cooperate, and that's right and proper, and in various things we will compete. And I think as the precinct grows, that we have to get used to some internal competition, because actually a little bit of edge in any kind of business is not a bad thing. And I think what's helpful, and a number of people have said it, is the partners on the precinct actually do get on very well. We used to have regular meetings pre-COVID, and I think as we become more professional, as we have a greater exposure, there will be some gritty conversations where we have to be mature enough to say, I disagree, and one of those will be over how land is used. David made a good point, there's plenty of land there. As and when we start to curate, or when I say we, Amy starts to curate the demand on that land, the high probability is there will be a greater demand for land than there is land available. And therefore you will never satisfy all individuals and investors, and that's where we've got to have clarity as to what is the vision. And as part of somebody on the precinct, I would want that all of us have a stake in what that vision is, so that what we're doing is aligned not just to where we are now, we should be true to our standards and heritage, but what is our aspiration.
Yeah, and as part of that, what do you see as the most important thing for you? Is it data sharing? Is it sharing staff and researchers? Is it having the right facilities in place or the technology?
So there's a number of different elements there. Number one, the precinct, whilst it's awful just to walk round. And one of the phrases I loved, an early update on what makes a precinct good, was a bump space, where you literally walk into people, and that enables elements of ad hoc conversations. The precinct is poorly designed for that. So I think as part of our plan, we have to create that. But I think there are also ways where we can share more information electronically that can impact and benefit customer safety, patient safety. We can ensure that our doctors, we understand what's going on across each one, so that helps, again, both safety and credentialing. So doctors who work in one hospital could automatically be given access to others. So we make ourselves easy to do business with. I think what we have at the moment is individual institutions with individual governance and individual processes. Now, that will not be easy because there's lots of protocols specifically around health, but I think if the will is there, we can actually find ways of making this work. And it's taking in, it's the point about the team, that we are stronger together than just a collection of individual units.
Great. Okay, Cathryn and Amy, might just ask you about the actual governance structure. How do you see that folding out? I know we've had the Westmead Alliance in place previously, Cathryn, but some of your thinking about the immediate priorities and how you're going to deal with those and bring the stakeholders in this room together.
Okay, so for us locally, so we've obviously got a New South Wales Health, a health infrastructure, a local health district and a network group who are working together. That's expanded to include Roger and Phil as key stakeholders. And so a lot of that, though, has been around setting the vision and the aspirations of the precinct. And even for us, I just digress slightly, I think that's really interesting about bump space because we've gone into an integrated building with the adults. And that hasn't been without its challenges, but we have already learnt so much from each other, and that's another unique part of Westmead. We've got this whole of lifespan because actually a lot of the diseases that you end up with in adulthood, we can intervene in childhood. So that's a great opportunity. But I think, again, it's just that piece about how you drive innovation, and the innovation building is another great opportunity that we need to think about. Who are the tenants in there? How do we curate that? What is happening in that space? That's really important. But I think it does show that bit of competition, because you've got to let go when you go into those sort of shared environments. You've got to learn to negotiate. Things that you think you might not be a rubs are, and you've got to step back and think, actually, what are you trying to achieve? So that's even at quite a small scale, but going into that big CASB. So there's lots of lessons there, I think, for how we learn to be flexible, listen to each other, and just always know where your common point is and your destination. It's so important. You can work out everything as long as you're all going the same direction. So we've got those kind of hard governance things in place. I think it's now reactivating things like the Alliance and bringing in, local government, bringing in our different partners across the precinct. I think we've got to re-energise that. And then absolutely now we've got, I think, I'm looking at Phil and Roger here, that clarity of purpose about what we're going to excel in. Then we're in a position to be able to, for partners, we can actually communicate now the sorts of partners. So then we can work with our concierge to actually communicate that clearly. And I don't necessarily know that we've had that clarity before, or the pathway to drive it with purpose. Yeah.
Great. And then Amy, so maybe just a bit more on the curation discussion and then the silos, moving away from the silos to the broader look.
Yeah, it's very much moving away from silos. I'm glad Jeff touched on the Westmead Health and Innovation District Advisory Group that's being set up by the Greater Sydney Commission, because that's a great initiative to kind of get the the right people around the table to make sure that it's not a bunch of public servants talking to each other, although, we will sort things out on our side. I think one of the mottos that I'm putting in place is one front door, but no wrong door. So, Investment New South Wales, we do kind of 5 things, which I'll get to in a second. And so, that we're who you speak to with respect to, anything that you want to do to partner with government as investors into our state. But if creative tech talks to Create New South Wales, we'll partner with them to then make sure that happens. Health investors are talking to people like Cathryn, we'll partner with them to make sure it's happening. Regional New South Wales, for example, Infrastructure New South Wales. So we do have lots of great bits of government doing great stuff. And rest assured that if you're talking to them, we're plugged in. In terms of what you can talk to us about, we've kind of got 5 bits to our business at this point in time. One is our global and trade network. So globally, we either have or we're setting up or ramping up offices all around the world. That's actually really important to kind of hunt for investment into New South Wales, but also help our Australian businesses to export, because the bigger they get, the more jobs we get here. So that's a big part of it. Destination New South Wales, which I've touched touched on R&D New South Wales, particularly to, you know, partner with tertiary institutions, which are a hotbed for entrepreneurialism. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to get better at that word if I'm going to do this job. But, you know, to make sure that it's not just kind of research that isn't going anywhere, it's commercialised, it's translated, and again, whatever comes out of it is exported. And then into our investment attraction and execution team, and that's really the concierge that I've referred to before. It's partnering with you for things like, you know, payroll tax exemptions and plugging into planning for streamlined planning processes, streamlined regulation, co-investing in technology, co-investing in skills development, partnering with government with respect to government land. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. We work very deliberately to work out the best solution for the best partnership in the best place. And then on to that, my final pillar is kind of that industry development and strategic piece. If we want to skill Australians for jobs of the future, what are the industries we should be focusing on? What are our competitive advantages? What industries get paired with what industries and where? Because I think you'll find that certain businesses are magnets for other businesses. So we'll focus on the magnets to make sure we get the kind of biggest investment possible and the most jobs growth possible. So they're kind of how it sits at the moment. But yeah, definitely pick up the phone, and I think you'll find that you're talking to someone very enthusiastic to realise the vision and the mandate that the Premier's given us.
Fantastic. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we're going to do a very brief Q&A, but maybe I'll give you 30 seconds to think about and ask each of the panel members from their perspective, what do they want to contribute to what Westmead is going to be known for? And then we'll jump into some Q&A. So maybe, Michael, without notice, what's your perspective on being known for in Westmead?
Thank you for the notice. The phrase that we used earlier was point of difference, and that's what we have to. If we just replicate what happens elsewhere, then it will be fine, and I'm sure it'll be very successful. But it's trying to determine what that point of difference is. And if I'm candid, I'm not sure I know at the moment. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think it's creating that. And to go into some of these growth spurts, thinking you know what the answer is probably a little bit dangerous, because what you then do is plot a path that says this is where we're going to be. Now, other people may have a different view, and I'm sure they do, but I would go into it with that question that says, what is our competitive advantage now? What do we want to be known for in the future, and how do we get there? So I'm actually quite comfortable saying, I don't know.
Great. Cathryn, you want to follow that one?
I absolutely agree with Michael about the point of difference, and I think that's what we've been working really hard, certainly in health, because there's lots of health precincts around and big institutions and big hospitals that all provide very similar services. And I think that's what we've been really wanting to work through, is what is the point of difference from a health perspective and a research perspective at Westmead. So I think certainly around, you know, the cell and gene therapy, the precision medicine, I think if we can crack the big data, Phil, you'll be very pleased. You know, that would just be a huge step forward. We're the biggest, and I'm really going the Asia Pacific now, Jeff, you've got me really going there. You know, we're the biggest emergency department in Australia, the biggest health precinct in Australia. So, yeah, I think I want to be known for being really ambitious and really wanting to achieve. That's what I would love the precinct to be known for.
That's great. And Amy?
I think mine is a little bit in the context of the environment that we're in, which sort of touched on around resources are finite and government funding is finite. So how do we create the right partnerships for, you know, the highest value partnerships in the kind of highest value industries in the best suited place. And so if we get that right, then I'm seeing, you know, the best jobs growth and the best Sydney on the world stage and New South Wales on the world stage. And a tiny bit of me, you know, my personal motto, or why I get out of bed every day is to create access to opportunity for each and every citizen. And so there's something in that around inclusivity and the kind of the place having a variety of jobs and educational opportunities and housing as well, so that, and public space and open space and bump into and all of that, so that as many citizens as possible can feel involved in it and benefit from it.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we might hand over to the audience for some questions. Anybody want to ask a question of the panel? Just throw your hand up and then we're going to get you a microphone. Richard, is a mic coming?
Amy, you're a master in direct dealings and being able to navigate around the unsolicited proposals and that very careful step that needs to be made. Now, the success of the Aerotropolis was government knew what global companies they wanted to go to. This is a very competitive field, it's global. We can't wait for people to come to us, we need to go to them. So the execution of the direct dealing, the targeted approach, the concierging of that through the probity requirements of direct dealings, that's the secret sauce. Are you going to be able to deliver it?
Of course. So just for context, everyone, I've been involved in unsolicited proposals since 2013. I'm an ex-Treasury girl. I'm okay now. And so back in those days, I very much was involved. So now what has tended to happen, we've got our unsolicited proposals process. We've got some great projects and partnerships in with some, high impact for government and the community more broadly. But in the last 2.5 years, we've sort of expanded that to form, it doesn't, more direct dealings more broadly. So the opportunities don't need to come to us via an unsolicited proposal where we fill out a form on a website. We actually, a lot of them and a lot of the best ones, such as Atlassian, such as University of Sydney Partnership and some of the others that are soon to be announced, came about through really clever conversations, some of them by the wonderful Chief Commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission and Chief Investment Officer of Investment New South Wales. So we are taking a very much more kind of pragmatic and outcomes orientated approach to direct dealing. We still go through every single hurdle and meet the highest bar of the probity requirements. And everyone, it's kind of, a bit of a famous saying that, to get a direct dealing up with government, you need to be unique. There's actually some provisions in the direct dealing guidelines that, the ICAC guide for direct negotiations that we rely on as part of our process, where uniqueness can actually be not necessarily that you're the only person who can do it, but you're the only person who wants to do it and wants to give us that specific outcome that government has asked for, aligned with government objectives on a value for money basis. So once you broaden that, it is actually slightly more straightforward to actually have those constructive negotiations with government to see if we can reach an outcome, because government has tested the market at an appropriate point in time. And sometimes we can end up with more than one player because we have a broad place. So, for example, we're doing a market sounding at the moment at Tech Central for a creative precinct as a subcomponent, creative tech as a subcomponent of the precinct. So we are going to market and saying, hello, creative tech players, who wants to play? And then having conversations to see who would like to come into the precinct. And we won't end up with only one. So I think that gives you a sort of sense of how we are able to deal directly with the private sector without it necessarily being a form on a website.
Great. Well, David's giving the wrap up. I think we've... one more question. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess it's looking at the panel be directed at Cathryn, and it's a little bit of a Dorothy Dixer. So if you look at the precinct, that when we're left alone, in other words, the department and everyone else leaves us alone, we cooperate really well because we have, on the ground, we have common objectives, and often people are in the same persons in several organisations and with different governing bodies. So the challenge moving forward to make sure we've got the internal house in order for the internal, because this topic is governance, is that we've got 2 LHDs, so they've got different bodies heading up to health and different pathways. We've got 2 or 3 independent institutes which don't go through the Department of Health. And we're trying to develop innovation where we're taking research to the patients and improving healthcare by innovation, because that's what makes a good hospital a great hospital. So do you think, how do you think we can handle the challenge that we have a internal governance that's more cohesive, so they're not artificial barriers to delivering innovation at the academic end, which then makes us more attractive for external players?
I don't know, that's a Dorothy Dixer there. That's about a 10-minute treatise, I think. Let me think. I think this is kind of the soft and hard governance to me. I'm looking at Jeff there as well. I think, Phil, there's a hard governance that we need so that the partners on the campus, the health partners, I'll describe them, are really clear and cohesive. And I know that is absolutely the work that we've been doing. I think it's probably the bit about sometimes you imagine or make assumptions that there are other barriers around you with some of those government ones. And I think, as Amy's alluded to, if you think smart, you actually think about what the outcome you're trying to achieve. Sometimes they're not as big a barriers as you think, as long as you've got the clarity of the purpose and the clarity of the outcome. I genuinely believe if you've got that, you can navigate. That's from being in government a long time. You can navigate anything, is my view.
Yeah.
Great. All right, we might wrap it up there. I'll just leave with a passing comment that, having looked at a lot of projects going on at the moment and going on nationally, I think having engaged with this room and the people involved, they're a long way ahead of a number of other projects, and there's really a big opportunity to use that great base and the really personal relationships that are out here to drive us forward and meet all the targets that Jeff was describing in the opening address. So thank you to the panel. If you could put your hands together.